Question one, you're waiting for your plane to take off. The flight attendant announces that the plane will not take off until everyone lifts up their tray tables and returns their seats to a fully upright position. What type of contingency is the flight attendant using? All right, so even before we look at our answer choices, you should already start to think that we're looking at a group contingency, right? We're on a full flight, and the flight attendant is saying that everyone needs to engage in this response in order for us to take off. So, what group contingency requires that the entire group or every individual in the group complete the contingency in order to receive reinforcement? Is it a dependent group contingency, independent, interdependent, or non-contingency? You can immediately eliminate non-contingency. There is a contingency in place. If you lift up your tray tables, then we take off. What about dependent group contingency? Dependent group contingency, also known as the hero contingency, is dependent on one individual or a couple of individuals in the group. In this case, we're dependent on the whole group completing the contingency before we can take off. So we can eliminate A. What about independent? Independent, as long as you complete the contingency, you receive reinforcement. So it's not about the other people in your group. As long as you do it, you get the reinforcement. So we can eliminate B. That leaves us with C, interdependent group contingency, which says the entire group must engage or complete the contingency in order to receive reinforcement. John wants to lose weight, so he hires a personal trainer. The personal trainer is concerned with John's calorie intake. John's personal trainer tells John that he should be eating 4 small meals a day, 6 hours apart. What dimension should be used to track how often John is eating? Okay, so on the exam, the measurement questions are looking for the best type of measurement. We might be able to use more than one measurement in a scenario, but we need the measurement system that's going to give us the best data to help our client. In this case, John's personal trainer says, John, you need to eat 4 small meals a day, 6 hours apart. That should immediately, in your mind, get you thinking about one type of measurement in particular, okay? Because as we are counting meals, we're looking for a more specific measurement of those meals, right? It's not enough to just eat 4 small meals. They need to be a certain time apart. And when we're talking about time in between responses, what are we thinking about? Are we thinking about frequency? In a way, right? But that's not specific enough. Frequency is just going to say, well, John ate 4 small meals. But if John ate all those meals within 3 hours, he's not really hitting our goals. Okay, so frequency is not going to be specific enough. What about duration? Are we timing how long these meals take? No, as long as they're 6 hours apart, okay, that's what we're concerned with. So duration is not going to help us either. What about latency? The time between the SD and the start of a response. Do we care about that? Again, no. What do we care about? We care about the time in between those meals, which is also known as the inter-response time, the time in between responses. So John finishes a meal, we start our timer. John begins his meal, that's going to be our inter-response time or our IRT, and we're hoping, okay, to get 6 hours apart. So when the question says what dimension should be used to track how often John is eating, you can use frequency to count his meals, but we want the best answer and a much more specific answer, okay, is going to be this IRT, which is going to say, okay, John, his first meal was at 12 p.m. His next meal was at 6 p.m. John ate twice, okay, 6 hours apart. That's what we're looking for. IRT is our best answer. Which of the following areas of behavior analysis focuses on applying our body of knowledge to socially valid behaviors? All right, so the test is going to want to check if you know the different types of behavior analysis, right? We're focused on applied behavior analysis and service delivery, okay? But we also have experimental analysis of behavior and conceptual analysis of behavior, and each one has their own purpose. What area focuses on applying our body of knowledge to socially valid behaviors? Well, that of course is applied behavior analysis. That's what you're doing, right? As behavior analyst, we take all this joined knowledge of behavior and try to apply them to socially valid behaviors. Now, don't get that confused with behavior service delivery, which is when we're actually implementing programs, but when we're just applying our knowledge to these behaviors and trying to design these treatments, right? And we're taking data and developing more knowledge about socially valid behaviors, that is applied behavior analysis. The actual implementation is going to be behavior service delivery. What about experimental analysis of behavior? That is going to involve labs and controlled scenarios, typically using rats and other animals, all right? And then conceptual analysis of behavior is focused more on the theory, the theoretical, the concepts, the discussions of behavior analysis. But when we apply our knowledge to socially valid behaviors, which is the key word there, we are looking at applied behavior analysis. A group of 5 children with autism are working together in a clinical setting. The RBT in charge of leading the children requires everyone to respond together. The RBT has a planned way of responding to both correct and incorrect answers that they are not allowed to deviate from. What type of teaching does this most resemble? Okay, so in ABA, we have our 5 types of teaching along with our functional communication training. You need to know the specifics of all 5 types of teaching. How did it start? What are the characteristics? When is it used, etc. Okay. There's some very specific characteristics here of teaching that should point you towards one type of teaching in particular. Now, in this case, this RBT has all these clients in this sort of a classroom environment, which is very planned. Therefore, we can eliminate A, which is incidental / naturalistic teaching. Okay, those are the same things. Those take advantage of naturally occurring situations. In this case, if we have this planned way of teaching, we're not incidentally teaching. What about discrete trial teaching? Are we doing discrete trial teaching? Well, not necessarily. Okay, we have these scripts, these choral responding, hint, hint, right, where they're responding together. Okay, there's no real clear discrete trial teaching going on. So we're looking at what? We're looking at direct instruction, which involves choral responding, a scripted way of responding to answers, correct and incorrect, okay, quickly allowing you to identify mistakes, go back and correct them, okay. All of these characteristics are associated with direct instruction. So direct instruction looks like our best answer. What about D? TACT training. TACT training is a form of functional communication training. It's a verbal operant, but that's not what we're doing necessarily here, okay? We are engaged in direct instruction. Make sure you know all 5 types of teaching in ABA. They're going to ask you specific questions about each, okay? And you're going to need to differentiate or discriminate, I should say, between the 5 types. This type of conditioning focuses on the reflexive relationship between stimuli and responses. In ABA, or I should say in behaviorism, we talk about operant conditioning and respondent conditioning. What are the differences? You need to know that, okay? And they're not going to ask a whole lot of questions on respondent conditioning, given that we don't necessarily use it that much, right? We are focused on operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, of course, is our 3-term contingency of stimulus, response, stimulus, antecedent behavior, consequence relationship. Respondent conditioning, however, is associated between stimuli and responses, right? When you see that word reflex, think respondent, think sweating, think sneezing, okay? These are just reflexes. We're not controlling those, okay? Now, there's ways to condition these reflexes, think Pavlov and the bell. However, these are simply looking at that stimuli that elicits that response. So when we're talking about the type of conditioning that focuses on a reflexive relationship, an SR relationship, we are talking about respondent conditioning. Pretty easy to discern the difference between operant conditioning and respondent conditioning once you get into it. And there are very clear differences. I mean, SR versus SRS just being one of them. And then I think the key here is to think about the difference between a reflex, right? Because when we have respondent conditioning, we're just talking about reflexes, right? You smell pepper and you sneeze, okay? It's hot outside and you start to sweat. We're not necessarily controlling these, okay? They're just reflexes in response to some sort of stimuli. You are a BCBA tasked with establishing token economies for 3 clients. If you are starting from the very beginning, Which of the following would work best as tokens? All right, I like this question because it's going to give us a very important lesson on not making assumptions, trying not to draw from our previous experiences, and trying to stick to the technical and established knowledge we have. Because that's what the test is going to test you on, essentially, right? They want to know, do you know about our knowledge? Okay, we're not looking for your past experiences or your opinions. We want to know, do you know the task list? Do you know the terms? Do you know the definitions? Okay, can you conceptualize these and apply them? So in this case, what's going to work best for tokens? Okay, A, laminated squares with pictures of preferred images on them. I think we've all seen these type of tokens, right? Absolutely, those could work. Okay, remember, we're at the very beginning of token economy. The key here is none of these none of these necessarily have reinforcing properties yet. Remember, when we're establishing token economies, we first need to establish the token. Okay, how do we do that? We pair that token with other reinforcing properties. So when we say imitation dollar bills, those could also work. What about poker chips? Absolutely. The key here is none of these necessarily have inherent reinforcing properties yet until we pair them with backup reinforcers. So as long as we pair the dollar bills or the poker chips or the laminated squares with backup reinforcers that are worth working for or motivating to our clients, any one of these could work. Okay, so D, all the above. All of these could work as tokens. It really depends on how well we pair them, what we pair them with. Okay. Don't get, again, this is a good question on assumptions, okay, past experiences. We all seen laminated squares, but I can pair almost anything and use it as a token as long as that backup reinforcer is strong enough. So a little tricky, okay, but I think you can handle it if you understand the concept of token economies and what makes a token, essentially, right? Think about it. Think about our secondary reinforcers, okay, where they're conditioned to be reinforcing. Money isn't necessarily reinforcing until we pair it with something else, okay? Tokens are the same concept. Which of the following verbal operants is not evoked by a verbal SD? All right, so just how with our 5 styles of teaching in ABA, we need to know all the specifics. It goes the same for verbal operants. It's not enough to know that an echoic is just copying what is said or attacked as a label. You also need to know what evokes each one, what reinforces each one, and how it looks, okay? In this case, they want to know what is evoking this verbal operant, right? Which one is not evoked by a verbal SD? That not tells us that 3 of these are evoked by a verbal SD, 1 isn't. So we need to find the one that isn't. So you can either go in and you know these immediately, which you should, because verbal operants are not difficult, all right, once you've studied, or you can eliminate by finding the 3 that are evoked by verbal SD, okay, or you can find the one that isn't, right? You can attack it a bunch of different ways. So which one is not evoked by a verbal SD? A, an interverbal. An interverbal is absolutely evoked by a verbal SD. Interverbal is essentially a conversation, right? You say, what is your name? I say, my name is Alex, right? You say, what is your favorite color? I say, my name is green, etc. That's an interverbal evoked by a verbal SD. What about an echoic? Again, absolutely. I say, there is a dog. You say, there is a dog. Echoics are 100% evoked by verbal SDs. What about a tact? Now think about how we tact train. Okay, we start by saying, what is this? Label this. But that isn't a true tact. What's a true tact? A true tact is something evoked by a nonverbal SD. It's when you, or more importantly, our client, looks at an item and just labels it, okay? They see a Mercedes drive by, they point at it and they say Mercedes. It's evoked by a nonverbal SD. So tact is our answer, assumingly. Let's read all of our answer choices. Always read all of your answer choices. D, transcription. Transcription is evoked by a verbal SD. We are recording what someone is saying. So our answer here is C, tact. Tom slaps Greg while the teacher is not looking. In response, the teacher sends Tom outside the classroom to sit in the hall. 30 minutes later, Tom comes back into the room and slaps Greg again. The teacher sending Tom outside serves as what? Okay, so think about what Tom is getting out of slapping Greg. What is our function here? Okay. Apparently, our function is escape because Tom slaps Greg. Tom gets to leave the classroom. When Tom is allowed back in the room, he slaps Greg again. Okay, and that's a dead giveaway to what type of punisher, reinforcer, extinction, what type of consequence this is, right? Because escape serves as what? Escape serves as a negative reinforcer. Okay. Now, that's the easy, quick way to do it because as a BCBA, that's how we should get to this answer. But we can also look at it another way. Okay. The traditional way is, how do we know if something is punishing or reinforcing? Well, we ask ourselves, is the behavior increasing or decreasing? Okay. Well, here, Tom slaps Greg, consequence, Tom slaps Greg again. So that behavior is clearly maintained, if not increasing. So it's not going to be a punisher. Okay. No reinforcement is being withheld and the behavior is not decreasing, so it can't be extinction. So it's got to be, again, some sort of reinforcer. Now, are we taking away something or are we adding something? Well, Tom slaps Greg. He is essentially put in timeout, right? So this is going to be a negative reinforcer. Which of the following answer choices is not always a requirement of differential reinforcement? What is differential reinforcement? Reinforcing one behavior, putting another behavior on extinction, okay? Not all differential reinforcements teach what? Not all differential reinforcement teach a replacement behavior. That's the key to this question, okay? So again, which of the following answer choices is not always a requirement of differential reinforcement? A, reinforcement. You have to have reinforcement for differential reinforcement, okay? It's in the name. You need reinforcement. We have to reinforce something. Extinction as well, okay? We're putting something on extinction. We're not delivering reinforcement anymore to a previously reinforced behavior. A target behavior, absolutely. What are we looking at? What are we trying to reinforce? What are we trying to put on extinction? These are what we need to know. What we don't need is a replacement behavior. What type of differential reinforcement can you think of that does not teach a replacement behavior? Well, DRO doesn't, okay? In that case, we don't need to identify a replacement behavior. So, which of the following answer choices is not always a requirement of differential reinforcement? D, replacement behavior. Which of the following goals of behavior analysis as a science shows that repeated observations demonstrate correlation between events? So this is a definition question. You know, it might not be this easy on the exam, okay, but these are just practice, right? So while you're studying and while you're practicing, okay, it's important that you understand your terms backwards and forwards. I can't stress how important that is, okay? The definitions are where you need to start. Before you go on and take a bunch of practice exams and bog yourself down with that, you need to do staff meds. You need to know your terms and definitions. If you don't know your terms and definitions, the test is extremely, extremely difficult, okay? The test is not going to necessarily give you just definition questions. It's mostly applied. But when you're studying, you should always be testing your knowledge of definitions. And that's what we're doing here, okay? This is our first item on our 5th edition task list, okay? A1, identify the goals of behavior analysis as a science, right? So which of the following goals of behavior analysis as a science shows that repeated observations demonstrate correlation between events? Is that description, prediction, control, or none of the above? Well, it is one of them, okay? It's going to be description, prediction, or control. So what does description tell us? Description simply says facts about the event are observable and examinable, meaning we can see them, okay? It's not drawing correlation. It's not drawing a functional relation. There's no causation. It's just we can observe the behavior. We need the one, though, that says we're seeing a correlation. What does prediction say? Prediction says repeated observations show two events could correlate with each other. Okay? It suggests a causal relationship. It doesn't necessarily define a causal relationship, but it does demonstrate, okay, a correlation. So prediction is what we're looking for. Control, of course, is the highest level of understanding where we're actually seeing a functional relation between the IV and DV. So our answer here is prediction. Again, yes, it's simply a definition question, but you need to constantly test your knowledge of the terms and definitions. It's so important on the exam that you do that. Okay, hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe if you did. Be sure